Yes, hello. Thank you very much. I see somebody sharing their screen. I'm not sure they meant to, but it's a great pleasure to be with you today.
Welcome.
Would you like me to kick off?
Yes, please.
All right. I think you've asked me to keep my initial presentation quite short, so I will try to do that. And then we can have more of a dialogue. You have some questions for me, and then we open up to others in the room. So I'll start just by very briefly sharing my screen. I only have 2 slides, in fact. So we're really talking about COVID-19, systems thinking, sustainable transformation. Are you seeing the slides okay?
Yes.
All right. So what I want to talk through briefly are these 5 characteristics of systems thinking, which actually we are seeing during this pandemic, but also are extremely important for understanding sustainable transformation. And then I will talk to you briefly also about sustainable transformation, and particularly integrated value, and this model that I will talk you through very quickly. So I think it's better perhaps if I stop sharing the slides so you can listen to me, because I'll share them again at the end. But that is the essence of what I want to talk to you about. So what we see is that we're trying to change a complex system, society in particular, to be more sustainable. And so we need to understand how living systems work. And COVID-19 has given us the opportunity to really see that dynamic in action. And there are these 5 characteristics I want to highlight. The first is complexity. Of course, COVID-19 only spread because we're a very globally interconnected society today, not only through our information technology, but especially in this case through our travel and transport and logistics networks that we have. And that's one of the reasons, of course, why the virus has been allowed to spread and to become not just a local epidemic in Wuhan in China, but rather a global. So in every complex system, the interconnections are really important. And if I can just ask everybody else not to be sharing their screens. Thank you. Of course, for sustainability, those complex interactions, the interconnectedness is also important. So if we're wanting to try and change the system, the more we can forge those links, the more we can have people in a movement communicating with each other, sharing solutions, the better the chance of rapidly spreading those solutions and changing the system. The second characteristic is feedback loops. This is a systems thinking concept. And all it really means is that there are some forces in a system which will either balance out the system or will cancel out the system. So I don't know if you're meant to be sharing screens, but if you could rather just stay off of video, stay off of share screen, and stay on audio, that will be less distracting for me. So in particular, feedback loops operate in the COVID-19 crisis, of course, by reinforcing the infection. So when one person has the disease and the rate of infection is more than 1 passes that on to another person, that person passes it on to another person, and so we get this escalating feedback loop, and that creates exponential growth. We thought where initially numbers seemed very small, governments didn't take it very seriously, but the nature of exponential growth is that when you reach a tipping point, suddenly the doubling times are extremely fast. And in most countries, those doubling times in the initial stages were 3 or 4 days. Now that's okay if you've only got 10 cases, but when you've got 1,000 cases and then 10,000 cases and they're doubling every 3 or 4 days, very quickly it spreads. In sustainability and CSR, of course, feedback loops are also important. So are we creating behaviors that reinforce sustainable behavior? Or in fact, are we rewarding behavior that is unsustainable? For example, we still subsidize fossil fuels, hundreds of millions of dollars worth. And by comparison, we don't subsidize renewables nearly enough. So that creates, in fact, the wrong kind of feedback loop. We're incentivizing the growth of an unsustainable activity. Same with marketing and advertising that's telling us to consume more all the time, fast fashion. These all create reinforcements that are the wrong kind of reinforcements. On the other hand, what we really want are positive feedbacks that incentivize sustainable behavior, purchasing the right products, behaving in the right way. And we need policy for that. And we need there to be tax incentives, subsidies, and the right kinds of legislation. The third characteristics of complex systems is exponential growth. So I've kind of introduced that already when you talk about the doubling times of things. And what we see in sustainability is that many of the negative trends are on exponential growth curves. So whether it's population growth or consumption or energy use or resource extraction or biodiversity loss, carbon emissions, these are all growing exponentially. And one of the things we know from living systems is that exponential growth is impossible in the long term. So at some point in a finite system, which all living systems are, that exponential growth causes its own collapse. And this is the fourth characteristic of complex systems. We call it overshoot and collapse. At the very simplest scale, if you put bacteria in a petri dish, it will overconsume its resources, its food source, and the whole population will collapse. And this is really the behavior that we're still seeing in society. This was predicted already and modeled in the world's first global computer model, which was the 1972 Limits to Growth study. That's been updated 20, 30, and 40 years later. And still we're on a similar trajectory. We're over-consuming the resources, and at some stage, if we don't adapt quickly enough, the civilization itself will collapse, and so will the ecosystems on which it depends. But then coming to the last characteristic of complex systems, this is the idea of emergence. And emergence is unexpected behaviors that come from collective self-organization. And this is the idea that you basically have synergy. So 1 + 1 = 3, not 2. When people get together, they can often behave in ways that they don't behave as individuals. And this can be negative or it can be positive. You've heard of crowd mentality. Sometimes that's negative, for example, mob mentality, but sometimes it's also positive. So you can have innovation emerging when people get together. And the more people who get together and the more connected they are, sharing local information, sharing solutions, the more chance there is that that emergence will be positive and will actually bring sustainable solutions and share them very rapidly. I can't go into that much in much more detail. I will once again just share my screen though, to talk you then through the business response or sort of societal response. So here again were the characteristics of complex systems. The way that I talk about how we respond to that is in terms of integrated value and sustainable transformation. What you see here, and I'll talk through this rather rapidly, so feel free to take a picture, you can reflect on it later. But we see breakdown in 5 systems: the economic, social, ecological, knowledge, and human system. That breakdown, which we can also think of as triggers for transformation, happens in the form of disruption, such as natural disasters or crises. Pandemics is a good example now. Disparity, which is inequality in society. Degradation, which is resource and ecosystem destruction. Disconnection, which is to do with unequal access to technology, so the digital divide, but also now with robots replacing humans. And discontent, which is about lack of well-being in society. Sometimes this is communicable diseases like COVID-19, but often now it's also lifestyle diseases like cancers and diabetes and heart disease. For each of these areas of breakdown, that we get areas of response or breakthrough, positive areas that companies and industries and whole societies are working to bring solutions to. So you have the whole resilience economy, which is about lowering risk and helping us through crises. You have the access economy, which is about inclusion and fairness, promoting lack of discrimination, and better equality. You have the circular economy, of course, which is about and you have the digital economy, which is, of course, about the 4th industrial revolution, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and so on. Well-being economy, promoting vitality and happiness. Each of these leads to an innovation pathway, and the essence of integrated value is that you should try to combine these solutions. You should have a product or a service which both improves our security, in other words, lowers our risk, but also makes us more sustainable, or that is a smart solution that is also shared and inclusive, for a satisfying solution that is sustainable. So I'm going to stop at that point, stop sharing and stop talking. And I go back to Harsha, I believe, who will be asking a few questions.
Hi, Professor Visser. It was a great presentation, and I'm sure all of us would have a lot of questions over here. But before we start, I'd like to ask you a few questions on behalf of IICSR. Now, you have been in the space of CSR and sustainability since 1997, a career spreading over 2 decades. What was the turning point that you shifted the gears in 1997 from the conventional management verticals to sustainability and CSR? We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
To be honest, the shift took place right at the beginning of my career. So already when I was studying business science, I chose to do my dissertation on green marketing. That was the time just before the original Rio Earth Summit of 1992. So sustainability was in the air. I was interested in the ethics and the social responsibility of business already during my business degree. And then it was just a case of finding a way in through the career and starting in general consulting as a strategy analyst was a good way to get a foundation in business, but then I very quickly specialized by doing a master's in human ecology and then starting up KPMG's sustainability services. So it was a long time coming, and as soon as I practically could, I focused my career on it.
You have been raised in South Africa and have worked in UK, US, thus having experience of developed economies as well as emerging economies. What is the perception difference between both of these?
It's been changing, to be honest. It used to be that I could very clearly make a distinction. It's becoming less clear now. But let me start with what it used to be, which was, if you look at my stages of CSR model, then we typically say that companies are either in a defensive stage, so they're still just dealing with risk and compliance, or they're in a philanthropic stage, just all about charity, a promotional stage, which is all about marketing and brand, a strategic stage, which is about management systems, codes, and guidelines, or a transformational stage, which is what I call CSR 2.0. And for the most part, developed countries have been more in the strategic stage, especially if you look at large companies, whereas developing countries have been more in stages 2 and 3, the charitable and the promotional stages. Strangely enough, you've still found and find a lot of companies in developed countries that are at the defensive stage. So they're so focused on making money and shareholder value and resisting government intervention that they're in the defensive mode. And then you get a few, mainly from developed countries, that were experimenting with transformational approaches. And in terms of the 5 principles of CSR 2.0, which were creativity, all about innovation, scalability, responsiveness to stakeholders, circularity, about zero waste, and glocality, taking global principles and enacting them locally. What I tended to find is that developed countries were far more advanced on scaling solutions and on circularity, circular economy, whereas developing countries were actually fairly impressive on the responsiveness, really listening to stakeholders and trying to respond to their needs. Sometimes on glocality, taking global principles and applying them locally, and sometimes even on the creativity, which was the innovation. So a lot of social entrepreneurship I found even more in developing countries than in developed countries. I would say that pattern is still largely true, but we do see countries starting to break those patterns. So on scalability, for example, we start to see many CSR and sustainability solutions actually scaling even more quickly in developing countries. I mean, China is the biggest market for electric vehicles now. Is going pretty fast on renewables. So even there we start to see changes. And definitely the developing countries, I think most have moved, at least the large companies, fairly rapidly towards strategic approaches, and have started to leave behind the more philanthropic. But of course, we still see it, and I think India is one place, as a result of your mandatory CSR, where we still see it quite a lot, the philanthropic approach.
You have an experience in sustainability, CSR, entrepreneurship, academician. And you have also started Kaleidoscope Futures, CSR International. How hard is it to pursue all of them and still focus on your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think more and more people are having what we call a portfolio career. So that's been enabled by technology, but also the idea that you will work in a single place full time for all your career. It just doesn't really exist anymore. It's also a matter of choice and style. So I like to be multitasking, doing a few things. I don't like to be owned by a particular organization. I've always stepped out or dropped out of an organization as soon as I felt like, you know, they owned me and they that I had no room to really challenge and question and have the freedom to explore the leading edge. I sometimes say that I left KPMG when I started to believe my own bullshit, if you excuse the expression. So when you get caught into an institution, I think you lose your creativity and you lose your ability to challenge the status quo. Having said that, I don't think it's a great idea to be doing too many things because, of course, you spread very thin then. So I try to be focused on 2 or 3 things at one time and try and keep the balance. And normally these days that, you know, that's some kind of an academic role, so which I have at Cambridge and at Antwerp Management School mainly now. But then I also like to find the time to write and to be doing my my consulting work through Kaleidoscope Futures. So it's a constant journey of trying to find balance.
So now in the unprecedented COVID-19 times that we are in, what are the 3 key steps that companies should take to incorporate the basics of integrated value and sustainable transformation?
Yeah, I think I have a model actually of 7 steps of integrated value management, which I won't go through now, but for those who are interested, you can look it up. Since you asked me for 3, I'm going to take a slightly different approach, which is I think that one of the most important insights from COVID-19, of course, is resilience. So companies really have to focus far more on resilience than they have in the past. And that's quite difficult. Many companies have discovered they're not as resilient as they thought they were. After a couple of weeks or a couple of months, you know, many have collapsed, many have gone bankrupt. Hertz, the largest rental car company in the world, just went bankrupt last week. I think 38,000 people lost their jobs. Now, the thing with resilience is you have to, of course, prepare for uncertainty, and you have to invest spare capacity. And in our world of super efficiency, nobody has spare capacity anymore. Everybody's working to the limit. All products and services are delivered just in time. Production is finely tuned. So as soon as you get a disruption of the supply chain or of the workforce, as we've had with COVID-19, things very quickly fall apart. So companies are going to have to rethink their resilience strategies. That's one thing. The second is I do think that there will be a change in how we view responsibility. The old rhetoric that, you know, it's all about profits and shareholder value, I think has been shown to be a lie during the pandemic. Actually, most companies have put their employees first. They really have tried to do their best for their health, for their safety, and if possible, to keep their jobs. And so I think that reinforcing that message that we have actually entered the period of stakeholder capitalism. Of course, we had signs of it last year with the Business Roundtable statement on corporate purpose and the the annual letters from Larry Fink from BlackRock, and also the World Economic Forum putting out a new Davos manifesto. All of these really just talking about a stakeholder approach to business now. And so I think just reinforcing that now is the second thing. So resilience and responsibility. And the third one, and now I'm copying a little bit from John Elkington, who, as you know, withdrew his triple bottom line concept last year as a failed management concept, people, planet, profit, and is talking a lot more now about these 3 R's, so responsibility, resilience, and the third one, regeneration. What's been very clear during the crisis is that many of the effects of a slowdown or a complete stop in economic activity have been extremely positive certainly for the environment. Of course, emissions have gone down, traffic's gone down, resource consumption has gone down. Nature has had a time to breathe, to recover, and we see examples of it bouncing back and responding very quickly. And we see pollution levels less in cities. So I think that a change in the approach to CSR and sustainability to really focus on regeneration, how do we give both nature and our communities a chance to bounce back, to be healthy again. This is not about doing less bad. This is about having practices that create ecosystems that function even better. So things like regenerative agriculture is one example of that. So I think those 3 things, responsibility, resilience, and regeneration, the new triple bottom line.
Now that was for the corporates, but you see the governments right now are playing a major role over here. So according to you, what strategy should they adopt to ensure the principles of sustainability and unanimous growth in the emerging countries as well as in the developed economies? Because the challenges and both the places are different.
Yeah, I think that in both places, actually, we've seen that the old model of growth isn't working very well. We've had, of course, hundreds of millions of people coming out of poverty in developing countries, which is a good thing, but still inequality going up in almost every country in the world. And all of this growth has been catastrophic for the environment. I mean, we've lost 2/3 of our wildlife, of our biodiversity since 1970 on this planet. So it's definitely not working, the old model, but we have a political and an economic system now that relies on growth. So we have to ask for a different kind of growth. We start to see signs of this, such as the EU Green Deal and the circular economy package. And I think that we have to have governments now in both countries, and I'm not sure it's that different in each country. In a sense, developing countries have a chance to leapfrog, not to go through the dirty industrialization process that the West went through and the North. So the kinds of policies that we need now from governments are simply policies that incentivize the right kind of growth. And that's growth, of course, that is green, that encourages a switch from high carbon fossil fuels to low carbon renewables, and that promotes a circular economy. And then we need policies that really are far stronger on making growth inclusive. Here again, we haven't made a lot of progress. So on gender equality, for example, on current trends, the gender pay gap has actually got worse in the last 10 years, and it will take more than 200 years to close that gender pay gap globally. So that's not working either. So it means that governments, I think, are going to have to be far stronger and tougher in setting the targets of where we need to get to. The Sustainable Development Goals help, and I think every government needs to take those extremely seriously and make sure that they meet those. In the end, they won't be enough, but that's a very good start. And for governments then not to interfere with how we achieve them. I think this is a confusion that I've seen, especially in India with the CSR, mandatory CSR. Yeah? It's governments trying to tell you what companies what to do, instead of saying these are the things we need to change and improve, and this is the level we need to meet, whether it's on diversity or poverty or biodiversity or climate emissions. Set the ambitious target and then let business innovate to get there and support them in whatever ways you can. That's really the change we need to see.
So in the new world where we will be entering, as you earlier mentioned that the corporate should take the triple R route, but do you think it would be feasible at this juncture to do the CSR activities considering the financial turbulence that we are in? And if yes, then how do you integrate it such that it could be on the growth chart and even the investors would value it? So.
Yeah, I like this this quote by Warren Buffett, the multi-billionaire. He said once, you only know that someone's been swimming naked when the tide goes out, yeah, in the sea. So this is what we're seeing with companies. Companies are being exposed, of course, when times get tough and when we go into recessions. Then you see who really has a commitment to social responsibility and who was just pretending, who was just using it for public relations. Because it does come down to values, whether companies really believe that operating in an ethical and responsible and sustainable way is the right thing to do, and in the end will be a profitable thing to do. So I do think that many will be exposed at this time. We will see many slashing their CSR and sustainability budgets and teams. When they do cost cutting, probably these will be the first things to go. But that just demonstrates that they are not the leaders, that they're not committed. Those that realize that CSR and sustainability are actually a competitive advantage and are a prerequisite for success in the world that we're going into, will actually invest more in them. They will see that if they made the right decisions during COVID-19, such as investing in their people, looking after their people, that will pay back through employee commitment, through loyalty, through productivity, through motivation. If they've already started on the journey of resource productivity, getting to zero waste, excuse me. Looks like I've been speaking too much.
You've been working very hard.
Excuse me. So if they've been doing these things, then actually they'll continue to invest because they'll actually realize, excuse me, that they'll realize that this is the growth agenda for the future. And so again, I don't think that is necessarily different in developed and developing countries now. The main difference, I think, is that developing countries are under more pressure to to ease the lockdowns, to get people back into the economy. And so there's going to be a bigger trade-off between people's health and their jobs. And companies are going to have to deal with that to really support probably a second wave of infections in developing countries. And that will be a sign also of their social responsibility.
So in the times that we are, what would be the metrics or criteria which the investors would look when they are investing in a company which is in the emerging economy or a developing country and otherwise?
I think we're in an interesting time with metrics where it's getting beyond the old GRI, Global Reporting Initiative type of metrics. Now I think investors are genuinely more interested in measures of whether companies are making social and environmental issues part of their business model. So it's metrics about what percentage of your product portfolio is part of a solution to a societal or an environmental problem, and what part is neutral or is actually part of the problem. We do see some interesting metrics emerging, such as the value to society metrics of BASF. There's a group called the Value Balancing Alliance that's working on an integrated new way to measure externalities, the social and environmental costs, so that we can see whether companies really are financially imposing social and environmental costs. Big accounting firms also have new methodologies. So true cost, for example, from KPMG, total impact from PwC. So it's a very interesting time. Probably the most advanced measurement system right now is the Future Fit benchmark, and that's really based on systems thinking. It acknowledges that we have planetary boundaries and that we have social foundations. It's the idea really of the donut economy of Kate Raworth. And so I think metrics are actually going to change quite a bit now in terms of what investors are valuing, because finally we do see investors. When you've got BlackRock, which is the largest investor in the world, really asking for disclosures on climate risk, for example, then you know that something has changed. But it's going to be not reporting on hundreds of little things that you're doing, but what are the really big risks and opportunities, and is your business strategically placed to take advantage of that and to really, use it as a competitive advantage.
Although we are to take the necessary steps, considering there are only a handful institutions dedicated to CSR and sustainability, which topics should we introduce, or what kind of subjects should we learn in the space to be more equipped for the future? And what should even IICSR introduce?
Yeah, well, I think you will have noticed, my work as well has moved a little bit from focusing just on CSR in the old way. A lot of my work now is on systems thinking and how we make that practical, and on different concepts of value. So my approach I call integrated value, but it builds on other approaches like sustainable value and shared value, blended value. So I think really figuring out how we measure value that companies are creating or destroying in society, I think is one of the really crucial areas. How we enable leaders to think systemically, and then this area of future resilience, I think, is very important. We've been working at Antwerp Management School with the global HR services company Randstad to develop a future resilience index where we're able to measure employees' perceptions of their resilience as individuals, their organization's resilience, and the society's resilience. So I think that's going to become a big topic going forward. And then the one I've already mentioned, I think a switch to circular and regenerative models of business. Of course, we have to get to a fully circular economy, otherwise we can't continue to grow. But also to really find solutions that help nature and communities to bounce back.
We have with us a lot of young professionals. This is a time when most of them would graduate, and there are many entrepreneurs as well over here. So I would like to understand from you some career advice for the young professionals, and how should entrepreneurs deal with the situations that we are in, especially the startup entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I mean, this is both, I suppose, an exciting and a rather scary time for young people. The old formal economy cannot provide the jobs anymore. That's not only in emerging countries, that's in developed countries as well. So I would definitely say don't be thinking that you're preparing yourself to work for a big company. Some of you may, but most of you will need to be entrepreneurs. And so here you can only guide yourself in terms of where your passion lies. I think there's a lot of research, and it kind of makes sense as well, that solving the major social and environmental challenges, if you like, the SDGs themselves, you know, this is where the growth is going to be. But there are lots of hurdles to overcome. So anything that you can do to tackle one of those very specific issues, I would say, if you're starting out, I would discourage you, strangely enough, from being a generalist, from being a general CSR or sustainability person. I think we've moved beyond that now. We really need people who can see the big picture but go deep on an issue and really solve the issues at the micro level by bringing new services, new products. So, you know, pick what you care about, whether it's health or gender equality or, you know, sustainable consumption production, could be poverty, could be water, could be biodiversity, but pick something and then, you know, see what's happening. Try to think in an integrated value way. So use those 5 S's as a kind of test for innovation. You know, when you're thinking of coming up with a service or a product, just do the check. You know, is it making us more secure? Is it inclusive? So is it shared? Is it sustainable in that it reduces our dependence on resources? Is it satisfying in that it improves our health and well-being? And is it smart in that it uses the best of digital technologies today? And I think inevitably almost everything now needs to be off of the back of the next industrial revolution. So, you know, if you're not already into one of those spaces, whether it's artificial intelligence or blockchain or 3D printing or something like that, then probably you're going to find it difficult to have a transformative effect. So start with the digital transformation competence as the basis for your entrepreneurial activity, but then look at how you can link it to the other 4 areas and pick a specific challenge or issue you're trying to solve. And work collaboratively. That's the other thing I would say. It's very difficult to make an impact these days working on your own. So, try to reach out to other entrepreneurs, to other partners potentially, and find collaborative solutions.
Excellent. Now I would request all the audiences to come forth and let us know who would like to ask question. I see Dr. Suraj Kumar Suman has his hands up. So would you like to come in and ask your question? Am I audible, sir? Okay, we have...
Yes, but Dr. Suraj would need to go off of his off mute if he wants to put his question. No, maybe not.
We have Mr. Jawaharlal Chaudhary. Professor, would you like to ask any questions over here? You can unmute yourself and also switch on your video and come forth and ask.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Now, first question was, what is the optimum time needed for the transformation when such situation occurs like COVID-19? Because the situation gets worse. And what is the optimum time for the transformation from bad to better? And who are the stakeholders for bringing this transformation?
Thanks for the question. I mean, with something like COVID-19, what's clear is that this is going to change how we need to behave, not only for a few weeks or a few months, but probably for years to come. The initial severe reactions, of course, for most countries need to last a few months, the full lockdown, to have any kind of effect, to get the reinfection rate below 1. But practices like social distancing, I think we're going to have at least till the end of the year, probably next year as well, to minimize the chances of a second or a third wave of infections, and until we get a vaccine, which at the very earliest is probably 18 months that it might take to get an effective vaccine. So with really big disruptions like this, crises effectively, and then you factor in the economic crisis that it's causing, you can compare it a little bit to the global financial crisis of 2008. There, I would say for most countries, that was a 4-year adaptation. It had an impact and people had to recover for the next 4 years. I think COVID-19 is more severe than that. In a way that affected mainly the financial sector. This has affected every sector. And so I think the recovery period is going to be probably 5 years or more, as well as the social adaptation, which is going to have to be for a number of years. And of course, even if and when we get over this pandemic, we should expect that there will be other crises, maybe not exactly the same, probably another pandemic at some point. But, we have the climate crisis, we have other crises which we're going to have to deal with. So I think we're entering a time where we will almost be in a constant mode of adaptation. We're going to have to be far more ready and prepared for the next crisis, and how we're going to have to adapt as businesses, but also as individuals or professionals. Security, a stable operating environment, I think, is now a thing of the past.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have Ms. Preksha Shah and Manan Vora, as well as Dr. Kiku Upadhyay. So may I request Manan, since your video is also open, would you like to...
Well, I'm trying to merge two questions into one question. Well, if we consider the uh, developed countries and country like India or countries like Africa who are still on the verge of development, or African countries who are underdeveloped, what is this pandemic going to be affecting their economy, and especially the business which they are trying to develop, especially the new entrepreneurs who are trying to develop the business? How is it going to affect in the next 5 year or 10 year down the line play role? So what's your take on that particular thing?
Yeah, thanks for the question. As always, with so many crises and impacts, the poor countries or the less developed low income countries feel it the worst. The people are more vulnerable, of course. And so, we see it whether it's in Pakistan or in South Africa or I'm sure in India, that the political process has to be different, because you have to choose, do I let my people starve to death or die from corona? And which is the greater risk? And in the case of many developing countries, the greater risk is that people will starve to death. And so there's, I think, much more of a gamble that developing countries have to take, which is to ease the lockdown sooner than is actually wise if you were purely looking at the spread of the disease, and then deal with the consequences of the disease having a second wave and so on. So I think, unfortunately, for many of these countries, although it's kind of interesting that infection rates are generally lower in many developing countries, especially in Africa, and we still are figuring out scientifically why that may be the case. But in general, I would say that it means that countries will, they will have to restore their supply chains as quickly as possible, especially the global supply chains. They will have to focus more on their own national resilience. How do we keep feeding our people, assuming that this crisis will not be the last one and will have multi-year effects. For some, I think that there is an opportunity for those that are really progressive about this, is to look at global supply chains that have been particularly vulnerable during a crisis like this, because multinationals, I think one of their responses is going to be to say, I'm not going to rely on one country anymore. I'm going to spread my risk. And so I think there's an opportunity for countries to say, well, look, maybe we haven't been the providers of this sector of products, but if we can invest a little bit in capacity there and offer a good deal for the international investors, many of them will want to have operations now in multiple countries, so that if something hits again in future, then at least they have other options. That doesn't just get completely shut down. The other thing I think is that countries will have to encourage much more local supply chains, because you've seen what happens. Borders get closed and then everything comes to a stop. So if businesses can be given incentives to supply goods and services which are manufactured or grown locally, I think that's going to help their resilience in the future. Thanks for the question. I see we have 2 minutes left.
Yeah, we have Dr. Preksha, would you like to ask?
Yes. So I wanted to know that how are machine learning turning the sustainability of today's surrounding. Like when we were in our education systems, we were dependent upon the theory and logical knowledge about various things. But today the scenario is altogether different. Technology has developed so much that machine learning has been compulsory to the students, and people who are unable to something like that. Like the school education which we went in India was totally different what the next people will be coming up. And even though if there are a lot of universities, like, you know, students who used to travel to a lot of other countries to study, universities were changing their perspective, and now they can study the same at their place. So like what are the perspective things, like if you can tell me the sustainability of education?
It's a great question, and one I can't do any justice to in 1 minute, because I do think that education is going to change completely. For one thing, we figured out that very quickly we can pivot to educating online, at least to a large degree. And so all of that traveling to get your education somewhere else may not be necessary anymore. It may help to democratize education. But I think we're just starting to figure out what it is that humans can do better than machines. And you know, if you look at somebody like Elon Musk and Tesla, first he thought that his gigafactory would be completely automated. It would be the machine that builds the machine. And he figured out eventually that that was not true, right? He needed people to do certain functions that they were much better at. So I think education is going to have to really focus on that. And a lot of that is to do with our creativity as humans, to do with our ability to care for others, to look after each other. So that the caring industry is one area, the entrepreneurship or the creative industries is another. Anything that a machine can do faster or quicker or better, I think there's almost very little point in educating people on that. So of course we're also going to need education on how to interface with machines, and that's another area where so far there's been less. We've been taught computer skills, but that's not the same as interacting with a robot and being able to guide a robot effectively. So I think those are all areas that are going to come to the fore. And then, you know, you can still have your areas of specialization if you're interested in medicine or biology. It just means that some of your tasks will be made more effective. You'll have a bigger impact because you can sequence genomes far quicker. So you have to understand all of that, and that's what we have to educate on. And then still people can have rewarding careers. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to end it there because
there is one last question from Dr. K.K. Upadhyay. Could you please take it?
I actually have a call at this hour now, but give me your question quickly.
I'll be very, very short. See, revenues are going down now. There are a lot of demand from the government towards rehabilitation work. And CSR budgets are also not sure this year how much the budget will be. How should corporates plan for their CSR? Thank you.
I think it's true that that budgets will be challenged, but what this comes back to is CSR linked to your strategy or not? Companies still need to make and deliver products and services. If those products and services are not having a positive impact on society and the environment, then of course you might just slash your CSR budgets. If they are, however, then it becomes even more important to invest in them. So I think that's the challenge right now, is to reorient CSR, probably not to be anymore a separate department with a CSR manager. You might have a few specialists, but more and more it's about embedding it into all of the functions of the company, so that you have somebody in HR who understands how CSR relates to HR, somebody in marketing, somebody in operations, somebody in strategy, somebody in finance. So I think that's the trick, is it's all about making it more integrated, more strategic, more linked to the core products and services of the company. And when when companies do that, I don't think they're going to decrease their investments on that. It's only when they take a philanthropic approach where CSR is something on the side, something about doing good, then of course those budgets will be slashed, and it'll be difficult for those professionals to survive in that environment. So if you are that kind of professional, make sure that your work more and more is linked to the products and services of the company, to things like getting to a circular design for your products and services, or what are the strategic goals of the company that are aligned to the SDGs, and focus on those. Thank you.
Any
for your
message
question.
to all of us in India?
All 1 billion of you. Look, my message is that stop looking to the West and to the North and to rich countries for solutions. More and more we need emergent solutions from places that are used to changing rapidly. And that is the nature of emerging economies like India. You've changed far more than some places like the UK, where I am now, that's still stuck in very slow change. So look to your own strengths, your own creativity, and your own solutions to solving these big societal and environmental problems. And remember that the way that we make change happen is by creating movements. Tipping points happen when we get enough people focused on a common goal. And so that's what the work should be about, is generating that movement, joining it in whatever way you can. And you don't have to change or to even influence 1,000 people. You just have to change and influence the people and the companies and the governments in your local area. And then all of that adds up to a tipping point. And then you can be the leaders. And we see that more and more. A lot of the examples I start to look to are not from America, are not from Europe. They're from countries like Costa Rica or, South Africa or Thailand. So let India be one of those where you're bringing solutions now to the rest of the world.
Thank you. I'd like to thank
excellent,
you for
excellent
your
message.
time.
Excellent message. Excellent message.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank
Excellent
you for the
message.
time that you've given, and for all the audiences who've taken their time to come and join us and to share the pearls of wisdom. I'd like to thank the Enik Bhaskar company, CSR, SDG Chopal, and Asia Foundation to be a part of this and helping us to outreach as many people as possible. Thank you, Dr. Visser.
Thank you very much. Good luck to all of you, and stay in touch.